She asked if I could even afford this place, then the waiter said, "Welcome back, Miss Blake." So yeah, I'm Miranda, 30 years old. And after 5 years of not seeing my family, not speaking to them, barely even thinking about them without my blood pressure spiking, I walked right into a room full of them at Coraline, the most exclusive restaurant in New York, without telling them it was mine. Because it is. Coraline is mine. My blood, sweat, and bank loans built that place. But I didn't walk in as the owner. I walked in as a guest, because I wanted to see, for once, how they'd treat me when they didn't think they needed anything from me. It was Abigail's engagement party. Abigail, my little sister, the golden child. She always got what she wanted, and even now, she looked like she stepped out of some bridal fantasy with that smug little smile and a fiancé who looked like he was born in a country club. I got the invite through a mutual friend. My mother, of course, hadn't bothered reaching out personally. 5 years, and not a word. I walked in wearing a navy silk jumpsuit that hugged all the right places, hair slicked back, heels clicking against the marble floor like I belonged there, because I did. The hostess smiled at me like she didn't know I owned the place. That was the whole point. I nodded at her, gave her a fake last name I used for reservations when I didn't want to be recognized, and followed her to the private event room. The second I stepped in, I felt it, the shift. People turning, eyebrows raising. Not because they recognized me, but because they were wondering who the hell I was and why I looked like I didn't belong. Not in that room. Not with those people. And especially not with that family. My mother was the first to notice. She looked right at me and gave me this tight, confused smile. Like I was a memory she couldn't place. My father barely looked up from his scotch. He always had a way of pretending I didn't exist when it suited him. Abigail saw me and blinked, hard. Her fiancé looked at me like he was trying to decide if I was an ex or a threat. Maybe both. "Miranda," my mother said, voice rising just enough to draw attention. I smiled, polite but cold. "Hi, Mom." Gasps. I wish I were exaggerating. A full table of relatives did synchronized double takes, like I was a ghost crashing a wedding. "Miranda, darling, we weren't expecting you," my mother said, regaining her composure. She stood, air-kissed my cheeks, but her eyes scanned me like I was a walking problem. "You look different." "Healthy," I said. "Peaceful. You know, things you get when you're not being constantly undermined." My dad still hadn't looked up. He was staring into his drink like it was going to offer him a way out. Abigail stepped forward, forced smile painted on. "Wow, I didn't think you'd come." "Neither did I said. "But I had some free time." The waiter, my waiter, came by with champagne. I gave him a small nod. He poured mine last, which was deliberate. Subtle. That's the way we run things at Coraline. Everything is precise. I built it that way. The next hour was like a surreal fever dream. People kept asking what I'd been up to, where I was living, and pretending like they hadn't ghosted me for half a decade. I answered vaguely, played the part of the polite mystery guest. Meanwhile, I watched them eat food I'd selected, off dishes I'd ordered, under lighting I'd approved. It was mine. All of it. And they had no clue. The real kicker came when someone asked, "Can you believe Abigail got Coraline for her engagement party?" I heard the wait list is impossible. Abigail beamed. "I know, right? Daddy called in a few favors." I nearly choked on my drink. That's when I decided I'd had enough. I excused myself, walked into the kitchen like I owned the place, because again, I do, and pulled Lucas, the head chef, aside. "Give them the bill," I said quietly. His eyebrows shot up. "You sure?" "At a bottle of the 96 Chablis, the one I opened for myself." He smirked. "You got it." I returned just as dessert was served. My mother was laughing with someone from her book club. My father was now pretending to be deeply engaged in a conversation with a cousin he hated. And Abigail was twirling her hair around one finger, still playing hostess. Then the manager, also mine, approached the table with a sleek black folder and handed it to my father. "What's this?" he asked. "The check," the manager said politely. Abigail blinked. "Wait, I thought this was all comped." "No, ma'am," the manager said. "Miss Blake didn't authorize a comp." My mother's face went slack. "Miss Blake?" "Yes, the owner of Coraline." You could hear a pin drop. My father finally looked up, eyes narrowing. Abigail's fiancé's jaw actually dropped. I sipped my champagne slowly, waiting. "Miranda," my mother said, standing slowly, her voice low and dangerous. "What the hell is going on?" "I own this place," I said, smiling. "Have for 2 years. And I wanted to see how you'd treat me if I didn't come with a resume or a title, just as your daughter." Silence. My father cleared his throat. "You could have told us. You could have called me. Once. In 5 years." No one had anything to say to that. I picked up my clutch, gave the room a once-over, and said, "Enjoy the meal. It's on you this time." Then I walked out, heels echoing off the marble, not looking back once. Greenwich wasn't home, not really. It was a showroom. A perfectly manicured, painfully curated backdrop for my parents' obsession with status. Everything was about the impression we gave, how we looked, how we spoke, where we went for summer, what we wore to Sunday brunch. The house itself felt like a museum, all white furniture and cold marble, and no place to actually sit and be yourself. My mother liked to say we were a family of achievers, which really meant you had to fit the image or disappear into the background. Abigail, of course, was the star. From the time she could walk, she knew how to perform. Dance recitals, charity events, riding lessons with imported horses from some stable in Vermont. She was golden, literally, blonde, bubbly, and always photo-ready. My parents adored her. My father would say, "That girl is going places," and my mother would just smile and nod like she'd handpicked her from a catalog. Then there was Nathaniel, the genius. My older brother could do calculus by 10, had an IQ score my father liked to casually slip into conversations at cocktail parties, and was the only person I knew who had a personal SAT tutor starting in 5th grade. He was quiet, twitchy, always in his own head, but they loved him because he was a prodigy. They treated his awkwardness like it was some endearing eccentricity. "He's too brilliant to be social," my mother would say, as if that explained why he never looked anyone in the eye and talked like a textbook. And then there was me, the third act no one asked for. The filler child. Not beautiful enough to be Abigail. Not brilliant enough to be Nathaniel. Just Miranda, the strange one. The girl who liked to sneak into the kitchen after school, not to steal snacks, but to watch the staff cook. Who asked for a set of knives for her 12th birthday. Who clipped recipes from Bon Appetit and taped them to the inside of her closet door because she wasn't allowed to hang posters. My mother called it that food fixation. She said it like a diagnosis. I remember one Christmas, I made gingerbread cookies from scratch, royal icing, homemade dough, the whole thing. I left them on the marble kitchen counter, arranged like a little edible village. My mother walked in, took one look, and said, "Next time, just buy them. This isn't a bakery." Then she threw half of them away because they clashed with the Christmas decor. I was 11. It wasn't just that they didn't care. They were embarrassed. My mother once told a family friend at a charity gala that I was dabbling in kitchen arts, like it was some phase I'd grow out of, like I was a 6-year-old obsessed with dinosaurs. My father didn't talk about me much at all. I overheard him once, telling a colleague at one of his firm's barbecues that he had 2 very accomplished children and one with creative tendencies. That was his version of support. The only person who ever treated me like I wasn't broken was Zora, our housekeeper from Serbia. She came to us when I was 8 and stayed until I left for culinary school. Zora was the kind of woman who didn't ask for permission to exist. She moved through the house like she'd built it herself and didn't give a damn if my mother thought her accent was too thick or her clothes too plain. She smelled like coffee grounds and garlic and always had flour on her sleeves. I loved her like a second mother, maybe more than the first. Zora never laughed when I said I wanted to be a chef. She never looked at me sideways when I tried to make creme brulee at midnight or burned through a week's allowance on sea salt and vanilla beans. She taught me how to knead dough properly, how to use the back of a spoon to test sauces, how to taste something with your whole face, not just your tongue. When I burned my first roux, she just said, "Good. Now you learn." She let me cry when my mother called my birthday cake too rustic and smiled when I told her I wanted to move to Paris. She was the only one who saw me, not as a disappointment, not as a punchline, but as a person. When I left for Le Cordon Bleu at 19, she packed my suitcase like she was sending me off to war, tucked a tiny jar of her homemade Ivar between my sweaters, and kissed my forehead without saying anything. That jar sat on my nightstand in my tiny dorm room in Paris until I ran out of money and had to sell it with the rest of my stuff. I still think about it. About her. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if my parents had encouraged me, even once. If they'd looked at me and said, "We're proud of you," instead of, "Why don't you try something practical?" But they didn't. They were too busy polishing Nathaniel's trophies and pinning Abigail's headshots on the wall. So I carved my own space. Learned to take the sting of their indifference and use it like salt. Sharp, necessary, and better in moderation. I built Coraline not just as a restaurant, but as proof that I mattered, that I could create something exquisite without their approval, that the girl with culinary inclinations had become a woman they couldn't ignore, no matter how much they tried. I knew from the moment I stepped into that beige, wood-paneled lecture hall at Wharton that I didn't belong. Everything about it felt like a performance. The starched shirts, the forced laughter, the case studies about leveraged buyouts and vertical integration delivered with the kind of dead-eyed confidence only trust fund kids could master. I sat in the third row, laptop open, coffee cooling beside me, pretending to take notes while the professor clicked through a presentation on market penetration strategies. My fingers hovered above the keyboard, But all I could think about was the sourdough starter I'd left back at my apartment in New York and whether it had overproofed. I hadn't wanted to go. I told my parents that. Repeatedly. But it wasn't really a conversation, it was an assignment. My father said it was a strategic move for long-term viability. My mother framed it as future-proofing my life. Like I was an app that needed updates. They said if I ever wanted to run a business, I needed a real education, not knife tricks and celebrity fantasies. They wrote the checks. I went. The lie didn't last long. Less than 3 months in, I was already unraveling. I'd sneak out of campus events to sit in a nearby cafe and scroll through photos of plated dishes on Instagram, obsessively watch videos of chefs breaking down chickens in 30 seconds flat, write fake menus in the margins of my finance notebooks. I was surrounded by people who dreamed of hedge funds and mergers while I dreamed of duck confit and burnt caramel. I was completely alone and more miserable than I'd ever been in my life. Then came the night everything changed. There was a food and wine festival in Philly, and I went on a whim, mostly to escape a networking mixer that smelled like dry cleaning and desperation. I remember walking into that event like I was crashing someone else's wedding, underdressed, out of place, but hungry for something real. That's when I saw him. Vincent Moreau. The Vincent Moreau. 3 Michelin stars. Parisian legend. Scary as hell and impossible to impress. He was doing a demo on rustic French sauces, standing behind a steel prep table with the kind of casual authority that made everyone in the room lean in. I don't even remember walking up to him. 1 minute I was watching from the edge, the next I was standing right there, clutching my notebook and blurting out something like, "I think I'm in the wrong life." He looked at me, really looked, and said, "Then get out of it." No hesitation, no pity, just that. Like it was the most obvious thing in the world. I left the festival high on adrenaline and clarity. The next morning I walked into the program director's office, dropped the withdrawal forms on her desk, and said I was done. She blinked at me like I'd just confessed to arson. "Do you know what you're walking away from?" she asked. I nodded. Something I never wanted. My parents didn't speak to me for 2 months after that. When I called to tell them, my mother sighed and said, "So you're throwing away your future to be a cook." Not chef. Cook. Like I'd chosen to work the line at a Denny's. My father didn't even come to the phone. The next day, the bank accounts they controlled were frozen. My tuition deposit was forfeited. My health insurance was canceled. That was their way of expressing disappointment, turning off the faucet and pretending I didn't exist. I enrolled in culinary school using my savings. Not Le Cordon Bleu like I dreamed of, but a scrappy, underfunded institute in Queens where the ovens didn't always work and the chef instructors yelled more than they taught. I washed dishes on weekends to make rent, lived in a Rochi walk-up with a broken radiator, and ate more ramen than I care to admit. And for the first time in my life, I felt alive. I'd wake up at 5 a.m. to catch the subway, do 12-hour days on my feet, burn my hands, cut my fingers, ruin sauces, and get screamed at, and still go home buzzing with the kind of tired that feels like progress. I had classmates from every walk of life, single moms, ex-cons, retired mechanics. All of us chasing something people said we'd never reach. And I belonged with them in a way I never did in Greenwich, or Wharton, or even my own family. Sometimes, late at night, I'd lie in bed and wonder if I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. Then I'd remember Vincent's voice. Then get out of it. And I'd fall asleep knowing that I had. I shared a closet-sized room with 3 other women in a 5th-floor walk-up in Astoria, where the radiator clanged like it was possessed, and the only window faced a brick wall. There were nights I'd come home so tired I didn't even take off my shoes, just collapsed on the futon wedged between a bookshelf full of expired textbooks and a mini fridge that hissed like a dying cat. My roommates were all hustling too. One was a dental hygienist in training, one worked graveyard shifts at a call center, and the third was studying to be a vet tech. We barely spoke, mostly just passed each other like ghosts in the hallway, but we all understood the silence. Those first years were brutal. I'd wake up at 4:30 a.m., catch the N train into Manhattan, and work back-to-back shifts at whatever kitchen would take me. Prep cook at a midtown brasserie, part-time pastry assistant at a French bistro in Tribeca, line cook for weekend brunch at a vegan cafe that didn't believe in seasoning. I sliced my fingers so many times I stopped noticing. I burned myself on hot pans, lost toenails from dropping heavy sheet trays, pulled doubles on no sleep, and powered through dinner service with ibuprofen and instant coffee. I cried on subway platforms. I bled on cutting boards. I questioned everything, except the work. But somehow, people started noticing. First it was a sous chef at the brasserie who pulled me aside after service and said, "You've got hands like someone who's been doing this a lot longer than you have." Then it was the pastry chef who let me design a dessert special, and it actually sold out. Word spread. I got calls, recommendations, offers to stage at better places. Slowly, The kitchens got cleaner, the hours a little less punishing, the pay marginally better. I met my first business partner, Cam, during a wine and small plates event in the East Village. He was in finance, of course, wore bad shoes and knew nothing about restaurants, but wanted to invest in passion. I didn't trust him, but he had access to capital and I had a vision, so we made a deal. We opened Coraline 2 years later in a converted dry cleaners on the Lower East Side with peeling paint and plumbing that needed constant prayer. The early days were chaos. Leaky pipes, health inspectors, oven fires, staff quitting mid-shift. But the food was good, really good, and that bought us time. The first write-up came from a blogger with more attitude than followers, but it caught on. Then someone from the Times showed up. We didn't know until the review dropped, and suddenly we were booked 3 weeks out. The phone didn't stop ringing. I worked 16-hour days, slept in the office twice a week, and couldn't afford to pay myself for the first 6 months, but I didn't care. Coraline was alive, and people wanted in. Cam started getting nervous. He didn't understand the business, didn't like that we weren't breaking even yet, kept talking about pivoting to a fast casual concept. I told him to stay out of the kitchen. He told me he wanted to bring in another investor. That's when I knew I had to get out. I spent the next year buying out every share. I picked up side gigs consulting for other restaurants, did a guest chef spot on a food show, taught weekend classes to hobbyists, saved every spare cent. I maxed out 2 credit cards and took on a silent partner to float the last payment. The day I signed the final buyout contract, I walked back into the kitchen, gathered the staff, and said, "It's ours now." And I meant it. Coraline became mine. Fully. No more compromises. No more outside voices. I changed the menu, redesigned the front of house, hired the people I trusted and fired the ones who didn't care. The reviews got better. The crowd stayed. We expanded the wine list, added a private tasting room, got invited to food festivals I used to sneak into. I wore my name on the lease and on the awning. People started calling me Chef Blake. Every now and then, someone from my past would show up, an old classmate, a former family friend, someone who used to smile politely when I said I wanted to cook for a living. They'd sit at the chef's counter and pretend they'd believed in me all along. I'd send out an amuse-bouche and let them wonder if I remembered. I remembered everything. The music in Coraline was set just low enough to let the conversations breathe, but I could still hear every syllable that came from their mouths. My family sat at the center table like royalty without a kingdom, draped in the kind of arrogance that never needed a reason. They hadn't changed. If anything, time had sharpened their edges, made them more fluent in condescension and subtle cruelty. Abigail had chosen the tablecloth. I recognized the shade of ivory she liked from her Pinterest boards. She was in her element, flashing her ring, playing hostess, pretending the entire restaurant had bent to her event. Her fiancé, Brooks, or something equally country club, laughed too loudly at nothing and had a voice that grated like a dull knife. My mother perched like a porcelain doll at the head of the table, sipping from a glass of wine I'd personally selected for the pairing and sneering after every sip. I sat 3 seats away, smile glued on like war paint, nodding at their small talk and pretending I didn't want to dump the amuse-bouche into someone's designer purse. They didn't know. That was the point. They were eating in my house, at my table, surrounded by my blood and hours and broken bones, and they didn't know. "What have you been doing lately, Miranda?" my aunt asked with a smirk, skewering a piece of turbot with the kind of contempt that didn't need seasoning. "Still in the kitchen somewhere?" I smiled tightly. "Yes, still there." "You should have gone into something stable," my mother said, not bothering to look up from her plate. "You know, business, like your father. Something respectable." My cousin chimed in. "Who even pays you for all this? I mean, this place is fancy. Is it like donations or something?" I chewed slowly. "Something like that." Abigail snorted. "Seriously, though, who runs this place? It's not bad, just a little ambitious." That beat espuma was weird. That espuma had taken me 6 months to perfect. I wanted to ask if she could even spell espuma. My father finally spoke, leaning back in his chair with that condescending chuckle that had made every childhood achievement feel like a participation trophy. "I don't understand how anyone makes money in this industry. Restaurants close every other week. It's like gambling, but with worse odds." I sipped my wine. "Maybe it's about more than money." He shook his head. "That's the problem with your generation. You think passion pays the bills." They moved on to the halibut course, which I had fought to keep on the menu after 3 sous chefs said it was too delicate for high-volume nights. I'd proven them wrong. The table didn't know that. My brother lifted a forkful, chewed, then made a face like he was sampling prison food. "This needs salt," he said. "It's bland," my mother added. "Is this supposed to be fine dining? Because I've had better fish at that place near the golf course." Abigail's fiancé pushed his plate away. "It's too fishy." I stared at them. At these people eating my food, criticizing my craft, oblivious to the hours I'd spent bleeding over stainless steel to make every element perfect. It was like watching someone insult your child to your face and not realizing you're the mother. Still no husband, Miranda? Abigail asked, swirling her wine. I mean, don't you get lonely? I'd go crazy if I didn't have someone to share everything with. I have plenty to share, I said. But no one to share it with, she prodded. No ring, no man, no future, my mother muttered, barely loud enough to pretend she hadn't meant to be heard. I watched them spoon the dessert course into their mouths. The lavender creme brulee I'd taken a year to balance without it tasting like soap. They barely acknowledged it. My father dropped his spoon with a clink and said, "Too sweet. And what's with the flowers?" My brother laughed. She always liked weird food. They toasted Abigail's future, Brooks Trust Fund, and a wedding at a vineyard in California where they'd already started planning the wine list without ever asking for my input. And I just sat there, smiling politely, surrounded by praise for the space, the lighting, the vibe, everything but the thing they were literally eating off of. I'd created it all. I was the reason they were comfortable, full, entertained. And they had no idea. They were enjoying my legacy with all the grace of hyenas at a state dinner. Masks on, mouths full, completely blind to who had fed them. Abigail was swirling the last drops of her wine, tipsy enough to be bold, bored enough to be cruel. She looked at me across the table with that practiced little smile, the one that always came right before she said something meant to cut deep and sound effortless. "Can you even afford a place like this, Miranda?" she asked, loud enough to draw chuckles from the ends of the table. "I mean, it's beautiful, obviously. Way out of your league." I didn't say anything. Not right away. I let the silence hang just long enough to make her think she'd won, just long enough for my father to glance up with a smirk and my mother to start fixing her napkin like she was bored of the whole conversation. Then I heard the familiar click of Oren's shoes behind me. Perfect timing, as always. He stepped up to the table, eyes locked on me, his voice steady and clear. "Your table for the investor meeting is ready, Chef Miranda," he said. It hit like a gunshot in the middle of the room. Everything stopped. Utensils paused midair. Glasses froze halfway to lips. Conversations died instantly. My mother's hand jerked slightly and knocked over her water glass. My father blinked like someone had slapped him. Abigail tilted her head, confused, like she hadn't quite processed the words. "Chef?" my aunt echoed, looking from Oren to me like the pieces didn't fit. I turned to Oren and nodded. "Thank you. I'll be there in a moment." Then I looked back at the table, letting my gaze land on each face that had spent the evening mocking, belittling, judging. "Yes," I said quietly, my voice calm but sharp enough to slice the air. "I can afford a place like this." I pushed my chair back, stood slowly, and smoothed my hands over the sides of my dress. "Because this is my restaurant." Stillness. No gasps, no exclamations, just silence, dense and suffocating. "I built this." I continued, my voice even but cold. "Every plate you touched, every wine pairing, every course you criticized. I wrote the menu. I hired the chefs. I chose the linens. I pay the bills. This is my business. My name is on the lease, on the license, on the liquor permit. Coraline is mine." Abigail's jaw was slightly open. My mother looked like she'd swallowed something sour. My father was the first to recover, coughing once and adjusting his jacket like he was trying to reassert control over a conversation that was no longer his. "No wonder the fish was overdone," my brother muttered weakly, trying for humor. No one laughed. I stepped away from the table, heels clicking against the floor, spine straight, heart racing under my ribs, but face unmoved. I didn't need them to clap or cry or apologize. I just needed them to know. To sit there in stunned silence, surrounded by everything they had dismissed, everything they had tried to mock into nothing. And to understand, finally, that the girl they couldn't make fit into their mold had built something too big for them to ignore. I didn't sit back down. I stayed standing, hands loose at my sides, breath steady. The room hadn't moved. Even the ambient noise from the rest of the restaurant seemed to fade, like the air itself was waiting for what came next. "You want to know how I got here?" I said, locking eyes with my father first. "It started with 2 jobs and a broken futon in Queens. I shared a room with 3 women, none of whom spoke the same language as me, but we all understood hunger. I took out 3 separate loans, 2 from the bank, one from a guy in Brooklyn who only gave me the money because his niece liked my croissants." My mother's lips were pressed so tight they'd gone white. She didn't interrupt. "Not now. I was rejected by 7 investors before Cam finally gave me a shot." I continued. "And when he tried to take over this place, I worked 18-hour days for a year straight to buy him out. I cooked through back spasms, through bronchitis, through a broken finger. I built every plate, trained every staff member, negotiated every deal. No one handed me anything, especially not this family. I turned to Abigail. Her eyes were glossy, blinking too fast, like she couldn't decide if she was embarrassed or emotional or just furious at being outshined in her own spotlight. She opened her mouth like she might say something, then thought better of it. You used to laugh at me for making pancakes from scratch, I said to her, voice flat. Called me Betty Crocker in front of your friends. Now people make reservations 6 weeks out to eat my food, and you still think this is about luck? My brother was the first to speak. His voice was soft, lower than usual. I didn't know, he said. I should have asked. I'm sorry, Miranda. I nodded just once. Yeah, you should have. My mother inhaled sharply through her nose, then placed her wine glass down like she was composing herself for a speech. Well, she said, her tone suddenly warm, too warm. I think we can all agree that this is a moment to celebrate. We're so proud of you, darling. Let's raise a glass. To Miranda's surprising success. I stared at her. No, I said simply. She blinked. Excuse me. No toast. No fake smiles. No pretending we were in this together. I looked around the table, taking in the faces that had spent years telling me I was wasting my time. You don't get to stand here now and act like you saw this coming. You didn't. And you don't get to rewrite it. The table went quiet again. Abigail was dabbing her eyes with a cloth napkin. My father looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. If you want to be in my life, I said, it starts with respect. No more jokes about my career, no more backhanded compliments, no more pretending I'm the family disappointment. I looked at my mother last. You don't get to call me darling and try to take credit now. I did this in spite of you, not because of you. So either be honest about that, or be quiet. No one argued. I turned without waiting for permission and walked toward the back of the house, where the real work was happening, where the kitchen still buzzed and the staff still moved in rhythm. My space, my world. And for the first time, they knew it. All of them, word for word. It was a Thursday when my phone rang, the name on the screen making me pause mid-step in the back corridor of Coraline. Mom. Just that. No emojis, no follow-up. For a second I considered letting it go to voicemail, like I had so many times before. But something in me was different now. I didn't need to brace myself for her disappointment or gear up to defend my life choices. So I answered. She didn't waste time with small talk. What's it like? She asked. Her voice was softer than I remembered, slower. Running a restaurant. Being the one in charge. I leaned against the wall and let the noise of the kitchen fade behind me. It's exhausting, I said. But it's mine. There was a pause. Do you ever miss it? A more stable path. I almost laughed. You mean a path you would have approved of? She didn't answer, but the silence said enough. Then she asked, how do you come up with a menu? It caught me off guard. She wasn't being condescending. She sounded genuinely curious, like she was trying to see me for the first time. Later that weekend, Nathaniel showed up with his kids. He stood awkwardly by the front entrance, holding a bag of cookies I could tell he hadn't baked himself, while his son pressed his face against the glass looking into the kitchen like it was Santa's workshop. I thought maybe you could show them how the big machines work, he said. They think you're cooler than Spider-Man. I let them in, gave them tiny aprons, let them roll dough and smear too much tomato paste on mini flatbreads. When I looked up, Nathaniel was watching me the way someone watches something they never thought they'd understand. And Abigail actually texted me. Hey, she wrote. Do you know any caterers who don't overcharge for linens? Also, what's a reasonable budget for flowers? And thank you for everything. I sat on my office couch for a long time after that, just staring at the screen. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel anything except clear. For the first time, I didn't need to prove myself. Not to them. Not to anyone. I'd built something real, and whether they saw it late or not at all, it didn't change the fact that I saw myself now, fully, honestly. Not as the forgotten child, not as the strange girl with flour on her face, but as a woman who didn't need anyone's permission to be whole. And I am.